This year's winner of the Imam Malik Fellowship in Islamic Studies is Dr. Mohamed Khater, PhD in Islamic Studies student, whose thesis is entitled Jihad and Terrorism, an Islamic Perspective.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Dr. Clayton, and I thank the university and the foundation, and Dr. Omar Shaheen. I thank him also for recommending me for the honor of having Imam Malik's fellowship. My dissertation is, as Dr. Clayton mentioned, it's Jihad and Terrorism, an Islamic Perspective. And I came at this not from a theological. I've never been ordained as an imam, if there is no such a thing anyway, but I never grew up knowing or studying religion per se. My interest in the field started actually at 9/11. 9/11. I worked in Wall Street area for about 30 years, and I was there during 9/11. And I heard from people at the time what Islam is, and people talking about Islam, and Islam is killing people, and Islam, that's always kill all the infidels, and Islam is violent. And of course, I grew up knowing that that's the complete opposite of my understanding of what Islam is. But I started after 9/11 directing my attention more to the society, working in a society rather than just working as just working on corporate work. So started working with the Islamic organizations, and I was a president of our local Islamic society for a period of 10 years altogether. And I came to know many things, and I came to understand my brothers and sisters in the American brothers and sisters. I came from Egypt anyway. I grew up in Egypt. And I started hearing things that I didn't know what the answers for that for. When somebody says, my religion kills people, calling for killing people. And I had to study that. And that was, I'd never had a time to dedicate to it until lately when I decided that I wanted to study this subject. So when we talk about terrorism and jihad, I started my dissertation of defining what terrorism is. And for my surprise, I found that there is more than 300 definitions of what terrorism is. So I thought it's one thing, people killing people. But it's a very complicated subject when you read about it, and how the academicians, how the countries, different countries define terrorism. It turned out that there is a couple of problems that are apparent, not just one, in defining terrorism. They call it relativism. One man's terrorist is another man's freedom fighter. So how do we look at the terrorist activity? And dynamism, things change. The hero of yesterday becomes the terrorist of today. A friend of ours or some of a country doing our work, he's a hero. If they change and do something against this country, he's a terrorist. It's the same person, keep doing the same thing. And mostly the definition of terrorism, very simply, is to group of people or an individual or a state trying to use violence to reach a political aim. Now, that was the definition or the problem of definition of terrorism. Now, I also had to study, is there a relationship between religion and violence? Since Islam is accused to be a violent religion. And now I found that there is a problem of defining religion. We thought religion is from God and that's a religion. It turned out no, there is another, I don't know how many, it's close to 100 definitions or a lot of definitions for religion. Turned out that a religion is something that you feel deeply about, which we all feel deeply about the religion when we talk about it, but it can be nationalism, can be secularism, it can be sports. If you feel very much about sports, then this is your life. You dedicate your life to this. You think about it day and night, or decides how to go in life. So religion, we take it as something from God, but it can mean something else. And it also found out that there is not a clear difference between religion and secularism, for example, and nationalism, and when it comes to violence. Many researchers and social scientists challenge the conventional wisdom that religion has the dangerous tendency to promote violence. And I'm going to mention a quote from William Kavanagh, who is a professor at DePaul University. And he says, the myth of religious violence promotes dichotomy between us in the secular West, who are rational and peacemaking, and them, the hordes of violent religious fanatics in the Muslim world. Their violence is religious and therefore irrational and divisive. Our violence, on the other hand, is rational, peacemaking, and necessary. Regrettably, we find ourselves forced to bomb them into higher rationality. Study also, I came across a study of Mark Jersgenmeyer, who is from UC Berkeley, who studied terrorists or people who are accused of doing violence in the United States and in different places around the world. And I'm going to quote him in saying that very few religiously related radicals, activists, or terrorists frame their motivations in scriptural or theological terms. Most are woefully ignorant about the textual and intellectual aspect of their traditions. Instead, they talk about the defense of their community and their faith in general, and the threat of particular groups, including secular politicians in particular. Religious beliefs and traditions are part of their worldview, but only part of it, even though it may be the vocabulary through which other social and political issues are enunciated. That's why studying the root causes of terrorism is crucial in fighting terrorism. Jihad, on the other hand, what jihad is? The word has been used and abused. Jihad jahada is a transitive verb, and it means mostly to strive, to struggle for a noble cause against an enemy. And the enemy, when we think about it, is defined in various terms. The enemy can be within ourselves and within our families and within our communities that might mean good. So we struggle against our inner needs, the desires that we have. We struggle against that. So that we also have jihad, that's a spiritual jihad, spiritual fight against our own selves. And there is outside jihad. You struggle against outside forces. That could be forces in the community, forces in our society that we need to change, something that we see bad in a society. And we actually use these terms. The politicians are fond of saying, I'm going to fight for you. I'm going to fight for this cause. We use similar languages, Similar, but we never, when it comes, because jihad is a foreign word and associated with something, and then we always tend to think of it as a bad thing, a bad word. Also, jihad is fighting against an outside enemy that's coming to invade a country. That's jihad. And to do something bad to your own country or to the community, and sometimes can be military jihad, because that's also allowed in Islam to do that. Jihad definition, we look at it from the study of what we call maqasid al-sharia, or the objectives of the law that God put. Man, as was mentioned before, and I think I heard the sister saying that man is entrusted, or we have the earth. Man, God put man on earth, entrusted man with earth, entrusted human beings with the earth. So we are sort of representatives of God on earth. And that's a responsibility that all of us have to take it seriously. So man is required not to do things only for himself or herself. He's required to do things good for their community, their family, and everybody around them, and the whole world, and the earth. Take care of the earth that we live on. This is part of the objective of the law, the Islamic law. And studying this, we would never think God would put man on earth to fight one another. In Islam, it's the opposite, to get to know one another, to cooperate with one another in goodness, not to kill one another. And in Islam also told us in the Islamic law that you don't go out and force anybody to follow any religion. We have freedom of choice. And God gave us to every one of us. The military jihad, when we're saying, it is not to convert anybody to any religion, as some people say. It is in the research I had done, it's a just war to only repel aggression against a community or to defend against persecution. The scholars, the Muslim scholars, identified these only two cases that military jihad is allowed. Defend against aggression and repel and defend against oppression that's happening to people. Also people talked about the Prophet Muhammad had many battles. And when you look at the history of Prophet Muhammad, he never aggressed against anybody. In the research also that was done, went through the battles that the Prophet was kicked out of his home for 13 years that he started to preach the new Islamic religion. And his companions were persecuted and they were forced to flee Mecca, which is the place where Prophet Muhammad lived. So the battles that he was fighting was to defend himself and his companions and the new religion against the Meccans, or the policies of Mecca at the time, who were bent on eliminating the Prophet and completely eradicating his new religion. When the Prophet had a peace treaty with the Meccans at the time, it turned out that more people followed or came into the Islamic religion, in the 2 years that followed the peace treaty that he had with his enemies at the time, the Meccans, than happened in the 17 years that he had, after he started his mission. So this means that Islam grows with peace, and Islam calls for peace, and it's only when you're attacked that you can defend, or you have the obligation to defend yourself. It's not a luxury anymore. There is also when we call civil jihad. And the civil jihad is a struggle that satisfies the different needs of a community that we have to do. As I heard, everybody's doing something from what my colleagues talked about. Everybody's trying to do something good in the community. In Islam, it's called jihad. You are struggling. You are struggling and you're striving to do something good for other human beings, which is something we're ordered by God to do. Coming back to terrorism, the research that I had, and many people researched before me, the punishment of terrorism in Islam is the severest punishment of all. There is punishment for crimes. The severest punishment in Islam is reserved for terrorists. And the terrorism is called a war. Islam calls it, the Quran calls it, war against God and His Messenger. So you're fighting God. So terrorists are fighting God and His Messenger. I just want you to keep this in mind again, because we hear many different things, unfortunately, in this regards. Also heard about Islam kills people, or the Quran. There are verses in the Quran that says kill the infidels. There is nothing in the Quran, by the way, that says that, but people just, it's repeated, after repeated. In the research I did, I went through the verses that people say that it calls for that. And it went through line by line and word for word what these verses mean. It doesn't mean at all to go and kill anybody. There are many things, obviously, there are, after reading or after going through a research that you come up with and you would hope that people would do. One of the main things is the ignorance, the Muslim ignorance before other people's ignorance, because the people who do kill, they always have something. There is something wrong with anybody who kills another person, no matter what. In any name, there is no killing. So ignorance or insufficient false knowledge feeds bigotry. Bigotry prepares the ground for fanaticism, and fanaticism leaves the door ajar for terror. So what I called for is to have qualified and competent Muslim jurists and scholars to start the process of renewing and codification of Islamic law, to take into consideration the realities of the times and places. You can't have a fixed laws that were written years ago. Laws change with time, and Islam allows for changing rules with time and places that are in. One of the things that some of my Muslim friends would disagree with, Muslims should start or should not continue to say Islam is a peaceful religion. You might have heard that. I would would call Islam a religion of just peace. Justice and peace, they have to go together. You can't ask someone, we all know that, to be peaceful and be kind when they're oppressed and being aggressed against. We have to have justice. We have justice, no justice, of course, no peace. So we have to have this. So Islam always calls for justice and for peace. And this is what Muslims have to understand this. There are a lot of double standards that many countries deal with one country, one situation one way, and deal with the same situation in a different way. Because these are our friends, we'll do this for them, and these are our enemies, we will not treat them the same way. That has to stop. That's maybe some people say it's a wishful thinking, but that's what reality, and if we need to end terrorism. There should be an agreement on a unified definition of terrorism. As I mentioned before, there are double standards also in the definitions. The punishment for terrorism has to be universal and has to be severe and swift. as actually in the Quran says that. Eradicating terrorism cannot be done overnight. Rather, it needs dedicated work, not just militarily against terrorists, but ideologically in the society as well. Muslims and non-Muslims are in a common fight together against terrorism. Islam has nothing to do with the acts of terror carried out in its name by a gang of ignorant criminals who deviated from Islam. I just want to end with a quote from a former CIA NSA official. I found it very interesting to read when I read his article about this. He said, "What if Islam had never existed? To some, it's a comforting thought. No clash of civilizations, no holy wars, no terrorists. Would Christianity have taken over the world? Would the Middle East be a peaceful beacon of democracy? Would 9/11 have happened?" And he ends with, "In fact, remove Islam from the path of history, and the world ends up exactly where it is today." It's a long article, and it's a long reasons for that. But the one thing I want to end with, in this research that I did, and I'm 100% confident that Islam has nothing to do with terrorism, and I would hope that my brothers and sisters can, from different faiths, connect together and understand that terror is against whole humanity, and it's not coming from one religion, and it has to be fought. Thank you very much.